right, everybody, and we are back talking about the Dallas Cowboys today, our first NFC East team and America's team. Now, this is actually my second take of the Cowboys video. I've recorded the Dallas, Denver, and Detroit videos all last Friday, but had some audio issues, so here we are now on Sunday evening recording them once again. But this could actually be seen as a good thing because now we have the first week of the preseason wrapping up right about now, but Dallas has already played their first preseason game, so we can go over a little bit of impressions from that as well. But looking at Dallas's background, how did we get to this point? Looking at their playoff history, they have not played in the NFC Championship game since, of course, 1995 when they won their most recent Super Bowl, and they certainly have had wildly varying results since then. Certainly during the 2000s and early 2010s, but we'll hone in more so on the time over the last 5 or 6 seasons since Dak Prescott's been at the helm, and even since Mike McCarthy's been the head coach in 2020. But seems to be Dallas sort of alternates between having a really magnificent regular season like we saw in 2016, 2021, and 2022, having sort of a mediocre season like in 2017 or 2019, or having an outright bad season like in 2020, or even the year before Dak Prescott was drafted in 2015. So definitely interesting to look at that with Dallas, and of course the last 2 seasons they do lose to the San Francisco 49ers. In 2021, they lose at home in the wild card round, and then just last season they defeat the Tampa Bay Bucks in the wild card round, but then they lose on the road in San Francisco, or rather Santa Clara, in the divisional round. So 49ers have definitely been a thorn in the Cowboys' side. Certainly two of the more prestigious teams in the NFC over the last couple seasons, and we'll see how things shake out this year. But before we talk about 2023, we'll go a little bit more in depth with the Cowboys in 2022. Of course, 12-5 record, coached by Mike McCarthy, and definitely one of the notable statistics I wanted to point out here was they were both a top 5 unit in terms of offense and defense when it came to points being put up, or rather on defense, points that they were allowing. So the offense was scoring the 4th most points in the NFL last year, and the defense allowed the 5th fewest points. All the while, the defense was number 1 in terms of generating turnovers, and when teams went up against the Cowboys, they lost the most fumbles against Dallas compared to any other team. I guess Dallas recovered fumbles more than any other defense did. So that certainly is a reason why Dallas would be 4th in the league in points for, even though their offense was only 11th in terms of yards. Now looking a little bit further down here at the season schedule for Dallas.
You've never said that before. Never.
They start off with a record of 0-1, and this game against Tampa Bay was certainly notable because they lose by a score of 19-3, but Dak Prescott actually goes down in this game. So Dallas' season, a lot of people were counting them out after that loss to the Tampa Bay Bucks, with Dak Prescott being out for the next several weeks, at least for the next month, it was apparent. So they were going up against both teams in the Super Bowl, the prior year, the Cincinnati Bengals and the Los Angeles Rams. But then, sandwiched between those two games, they had 2 divisional games with the New York Giants and Washington Commanders, followed up with another divisional matchup against the Philadelphia Eagles. So things were certainly looking bleak for Dallas after that Week 1 loss to Tampa Bay. But Cooper Rush steps in as the backup quarterback, and he wins 4 straight games for them before losing to the Philadelphia Eagles in Week 6 at the Link. But even then, he was able to put up a pretty substantial fight. That game was certainly one where Dallas hung around longer than many people believe they should have, but Cooper Rush, all in all, was able to keep Dallas afloat and really save their season here early on. So Dak Prescott re-enters the picture in Week 7 against the Detroit Lions, and besides 2 overtime losses here to the Green Bay Packers and Jacksonville Jaguars, they don't lose again until the final week of the regular season, and by that point in time, the playoff picture was already set for the most part, so not a very consequential loss for them. Really, the most consequential loss of this entire schedule was probably this Week 15 game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. That was really when they put the Philadelphia Eagles back in the driver's seat for that NFC East division. And despite the fact that they were able to defeat Gardner Minshew and the Eagles at home the following week, it didn't matter. The division was already just a little bit too far out of reach for the Dallas Cowboys. So, looking at some of the individual statistics for the Cowboys now, of course, Dak Prescott, 12 games started. I know there's been a lot of talk this offseason about Dak Prescott and his interceptions last year and how that's such a problem. In short, 15 interceptions in 12 games isn't the prettiest thing to look at just on a stat sheet here, but I'm really not too worried about Dak Prescott going forward. And I say that as a Philadelphia Eagles fan. He's certainly established himself as one of the more consistent quarterbacks in the National Football League. He's a player who, if you don't have him as a top 10 quarterback right now, he's right there. He's been captain consistency in terms of the quarterback position. Really say he's somebody probably very comparable to somebody like Kirk Cousins in Minnesota right now, where even though he isn't the flashiest name per se, doesn't really jump out at you when you watch the tape of the Cowboys like somebody like a Patrick Mahomes or a Josh Allen or even a Joe Burrow. He's there and he's putting up numbers. He's going to make sure that Dallas is winning football games, and he's going to do everything that's asked of him. So, don't really have too much of a concern about Dak Prescott's interceptions. I know it's certainly become a talking point in the national media of, oh, well, what's going to be the higher number this year, Dallas's wins or Dak's interceptions? I'm not worried about that, and I know Dak certainly isn't either. But looking at Cooper Rush here as well, 5 games started with a 4-1 record, 1,000 yards, 5 touchdowns, just 3 interceptions, interception percentage of exactly half of what Dak Prescott's was, just 3 interceptions in the 5 starts, and several more appearances as well. So Cooper Rush definitely proves that he's somebody who's able to step in, and this offense won't miss a beat with him. So props to Cooper Rush there. I know a lot of people counted him out when he came in as the starting quarterback, but he proved everybody wrong. And looking further down here at the running back spot, this was an interesting battle last year between Ezekiel Elliott and Tony Pollard. And we can see here that their carries last year were both right around that 200 attempt threshold. But despite that fact, Ezekiel Elliott averages just 3.8 yards per attempt, while Tony Pollard averages a staggering 5.2. So despite the fact that Tony Pollard technically only had 4 starts at the running back spot last year, and not even 200 carries, he's able to amass just over 1,000 yards with 9 touchdowns. And while Ezekiel Elliott did get 12 touchdowns, he had more than 100 yards fewer than Tony Pollard, despite the fact that he had almost 40 additional carries. And because of that, going into this offseason, Dallas said, there's the door, Zeke. We're giving Tony Pollard the franchise tag, and he's going to be their franchise back going forward. They gave Zeke the money a few seasons ago, but Tony Pollard really forced Dallas's hand, and he was able to really steal that running back job from Ezekiel Elliott. And I'm sure Zeke is going to find another job somewhere. I know he's not the player he was a few seasons ago, but he's certainly somebody that is still very effective at the NFL level, as we saw with the 12 touchdowns last season. Now looking at the wide receiver position, CeeDee Lamb has really established himself as one of the great young receivers in the National Football League right now. More than 1,300 yards, 100 receptions, and 9 touchdowns in all 17 games last year. He is clearly Dallas's number 1 option, and nobody else even really close. The next closest receiver is Dalton Schultz, who has almost 800 yards fewer than CeeDee Lamb. CeeDee Lamb had more than double Dalton Schultz's production in terms of yards. And you could combine the next 2 players here, Dalton Schultz and Noah Brown, and it would still be just a little right around CeeDee Lamb's production last year. So really remarkable stuff from CeeDee, only at age 23. So I expect him to only get better and better. And he really is one of the top receivers in the NFL. And it's really not even being talked about. I know everybody around the league seems to have a lot of respect for CeeDee Lamb, but he really is, and this is only going to be his 4th season this year. He could very well be talked about as one of the best receivers in the National Football League following this season. So looking down at the defensive statistics last year, one name stands out here more than anybody else, and I think everybody knows who that is. It's Micah Parsons. Whether you look at sacks, forced fumbles, fumble recoveries, quarterback hits, tackles for losses, he's right near the top in terms of pretty much any notable statistic for the defense last year for Dallas, and rightfully so. This guy is an absolute game wrecker, an absolute game changer for an already pretty strong Dallas defense. So certainly some other notable names here as well. DeMarcus Lawrence, Dorrance Armstrong Jr., Dante Fowler even, Deron Bland with 5 interceptions, Malik Hooker and Trayvon Diggs with 3 interceptions apiece, but this is Micah Parsons' unit through and through, and when all is said and done last year, we can look at Dallas's Pro Bowlers. They end up sending a staggering 7 players to the Pro Bowl last season, so they end up sending Zack Martin at offensive guard, of course, CeeDee Lamb, wide receiver, Tony Pollard, running back, DeMarcus Lawrence, Trayvon Diggs, and Micah Parsons on defense, and then Devontae Turpin at more of a special teams role, but he does make the Pro Bowl as well. So Dallas certainly had an incredible season last year, and we'll see what they did here to really build on that. Now, with that being said, looking at Dallas's 2023 offseason, what did they do to try to improve on that 12-5 mark last year? So we'll start with some of the players that they lost. Feel that's always a better way of going about this, to see what they lost to figure out what they need to acquire. So some of the notable players that departed from Dallas last season were guard Connor McGovern, who departs to the Buffalo Bills. He played 76% of snaps last year, so that certainly throws a bit of a wrinkle into Dallas's offensive line situation. Even more so as we'll go forward looking at their depth chart with the ongoing holdout as of August 13th with All-Pro guard Zack Martin. Another player they lost were actually their number 2 and number 3 receivers last year, technically, both leaving for the Houston Texans. Those players being Noah Brown, the wide receiver, and Dalton Schultz, the tight end, both playing just under 70% of snaps last season for Dallas. And I will also mention they lose their kicker, Brett Maher, departs for the Denver Broncos, as we will see in the Denver video, but Dallas will certainly need to replace his production as well. So definitely be interested to keep an eye on that kicking situation. Dallas is a team that figures to be in a lot of highly contested games, so they'll certainly want all the points on the board that they can get. And then finally, I will give a shout out as well to the aforementioned Ezekiel Elliott. Played only 47% of snaps last season. Of course, Tony Pollard kind of stealing that job from him. Feed Tony, if you will. That's what Dallas did. They fed Tony. It seems like they're feeding him the money right now. But Ezekiel Elliott's still without a job, though I do still have faith he'll land on his feet. I know there have been some rumors Dallas might consider bringing him back, but I think he will move on to a different team. I've heard New England being thrown around. Maybe even a team like the Jets or the Dolphins could use a quarterback. I know there's a lot of running backs out there still looking for work. Ezekiel Elliott, Dalvin Cook, Kareem Hunt, Leonard Fournette, all could be a very strong asset to a team looking for a running back to add to their committee. But with that being said, we'll look at the players that Dallas brought in of note, and 2 of the more notable ones were via trade, those players being Stephon Gilmore and Brandon Cooks. And these are really the only 2 major players I would say they bring in. So Brandon Cooks comes in from the Houston Texans for a late round draft pick, though I could say in effect that the Dallas Cowboys traded Brandon Cooks, well, acquired Brandon Cooks, if you will, in exchange for Dalton Schultz and Noah Brown. And you would figure that Brandon Cooks is going to take on their production in the offense this season. So I'd say that's a fair assessment to say. The 2 Texas teams ended up switching Schultz and Brown for Brandon Cooks, and that's a pretty good deal for both sides, I would say, though. From Dallas's point of view, they do have other players coming in via the draft as well to help bring up that production. So they also bring in Stephon Gilmore from the Indianapolis Colts through a trade. He played 93% of snaps for them last year. He is age 33, so definitely getting up there. I will say, though, Stephon Gilmore, while a tremendous player in his prime, Dallas isn't asking him to be a number 1 lockdown corner. They already have Trayvon Diggs, so Stephon Gilmore definitely figures to be in a second cornerback role going up against teams' number 2 receivers. So while he may have lost a step compared to what he once was just a few years ago when he won Defensive Player of the Year with the New England Patriots, I do believe he still will be an effective player given the role. And I'll also give a shout out to Ronald Jones here from the Kansas City Chiefs, formerly of the Tampa Bay Buccaneers as well. But seems like Dallas kind of has things figured out at the running back spot right now behind Tony Pollard. Not necessarily figured out, but they have guys in-house that they really like. So Ronald Jones might not even see too much action this year. And he is suspended for the first 2 games of the season as well due to substance abuse. So Ronald Jones might not even see the field that much this year, but he's probably the next most notable player they bring in besides Brandon Cooks and Stephon Gilmore. So really not too much doing for Dallas in terms of free agency and trades. So this draft better be a home run if Dallas wants to really establish themselves as making improvements this year. Looking at this draft, it's really not a bad one by any means. Nothing really knocking your socks off at first glance, but they start off with 2 back-to-back picks from the University of Michigan. Mozzie Smith figures to be an interior defensive line option for them, as well as Luke Schoonmaker, who is a tight end, although as we'll see in a second, he might not even start the season. They also bring in Tamarvian Overshone, who certainly showed some flash in their first preseason game against the Jacksonville Jaguars, although he might not be starting as well. Then they use the middle rounds 4 and round 5 here to beef up their trenches on both sides of the ball. Then in round 6, they select Eric Scott and Deuce Vaughn, defensive back and running back respectively, before taking Jalen Brooks, another receiving option, in round 7 to round out their draft. So with that being said, let's look at how Dallas is going to put all this talent together with the 2023 depth chart. And we'll start no other position than the quarterback spot, where they have Dak Prescott certainly slated to be their starter once again. Not really many question marks there. Cooper Rush, after last year, certainly has the inside track to be the backup, although we'll mention Will Grier did impress in that preseason game against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So definitely a pro of why we're recording this video after week 1 of the preseason, because some of these players certainly did stand out, Will Grier being one of them. And looking at the running back spot, Tony Pollard absolutely going to be the bell cow this year. And a bit of a competition going on behind him right now. As of last week, going into training camp, or going into the first week of the preseason, I should say, the competition was primarily between Rico Dowdle, formerly a special teams option for Dallas. And I will note Mike McCarthy, the head coach, is a big fan of Rico Dowdle. And he was competing against Malik Davis, although after the first preseason game, Deuce Vaughn was certainly a player who was turning heads, the rookie 6th round pick. A little bit undersized, but certainly had some patience, certainly was somebody who displayed tremendous vision for a player of his size. So I wouldn't be surprised if Deuce Vaughn ends up taking some carries from these other 2 gentlemen, especially if an injury were to occur somewhere along the depth chart here. Moving along to the tight end spot, Jake Ferguson, the second-year player, is currently slated to be the starter, although wouldn't be surprised by the end of the season if Luke Schoonmaker ends up stealing some of those reps. Dallas definitely in a great position here, or at least a very good position at the tight end spot with a second-year player and a first-year player, so won't have to invest too much money in the tight end spot going forward, and both of these gentlemen should provide Dak Prescott a nice safety blanket on offense. And John Stevens Jr. down here, another player I will say impressed in the first preseason game, so perhaps he could creep his way up the depth chart to the number 3 position as well if things continue trending well for him, but still a lot of time left. We'll have to see how this shakes out. Looking at the wide receiver spot, the first 3 positions here are largely set, CeeDee Lamb, of course, being the clear number 1 option on this offense. Then Dallas going to make the trade for Brandon Cooks from the Houston Texans. He figures to be their number 2, with Michael Gallup slated as the number 3, which I feel is very appropriate for him. He kind of was forced to, well, the expectation was he was going to have to step up and be the number 2 last year after the departure of Amari Cooper, although his season ended up being shortened due to injury, so never really got to see that in action. But he's always been a very effective number 3 for them, so like him being able to return in that role, or at the very least a 2A and 2B with Brandon Cooks. We'll mention there is a bit of a competition going on right now for the number 4th spot between Simi Fioco, had to look up how that name was pronounced, but that is indeed how you say it, and then Jalen Tolbert, the second-year player, drafted in the 3rd round last year. And as of this moment, Jalen Tolbert does have the inside track for that job, but still a lot of time. Still a lot of time. Finally, we'll look at Dallas's offensive line, and I'm actually quite surprised this unit isn't the rock solid stalwart for the Cowboys that we've become accustomed to seeing over the last 10 or so years. And that is certainly due to the fact that Tyron Smith is getting up there in age. He is now entering his 13th season in the NFL. Still a very effective player, but he's been battling not any necessarily major injuries over the last few years, but certainly has been getting nicked up here and there. You could see that he's starting to get worn down. Do believe he still will be, at the very least, the second best player on this offensive line when all is said and done this season. But the biggest question mark hanging over this unit right now is, of course, Zack Martin, who is asking the Jones family for a payday, which he rightfully deserves. He's entering his 10th season, certainly understands that this might be the last chance for him to really cash in, get one more big money contract before he can ride off into the sunset in a few years. And he still absolutely has some tremendous football left in him, so he would be worth the money for sure. But as of right now, he has not reported to Dallas Cowboys camp, so that is certainly leaving a large cloud hang over really this offense as a whole. Because if he's not out there to start the regular season, I don't care how much you like the hype around CeeDee Lamb, or how much of a believer you are in Tony Pollard or Dak Prescott. If Zack Martin isn't there, this whole thing could really fall in on itself. And I say that because the rest of this offensive line really isn't too convincing for me. We do have Tyler Smith, their first round pick from last year, slated to start at the left guard position, but it is kind of an anomaly with him right now as to where does he fit on this offense. Ideally, he is the succession plan for Tyron Smith at left tackle, though he could potentially play right tackle. As of right now, he's slated to play left guard. Do you need him to play right guard if Zack Martin isn't there? So Dallas right now in the preseason, I'd say for their coaching staff and certainly their offensive line coaching staff, the objective has to be finding a role for Tyler Smith and really making sure that as they head into the season, they can keep consistency in terms of where guys are lining up, because that just makes things so much easier for when it comes to execution in terms of plays, especially run plays. So looking now at the rest of this offensive line, they do have Tyler Biadasz. I hope I'm pronouncing that name correctly. Didn't look that one up. The fourth-year player for them, drafted in the 4th round in 2020. And then Terrence Steele, slated to be their right tackle. So certainly some question marks as well. They're obviously not the standouts that Dallas is used to seeing at the center and right tackle position. Certainly Travis Frederick no longer in the fold now for a couple seasons now at the center spot. So looking at the defense, how does this defense shake up? I really do think this is one of the best units in the entire NFL from head to toe. Dallas really seems to have this thing figured out. So looking at their defense, there really aren't a lot of position battles going on here, so that certainly makes this easier. We'll start with the defensive line. DeMarcus Lawrence, of course, slated to start on the outside with these guys with the O last names are really throwing me for a loop. So we'll refer to this young man as Double O, the third-year player, or Osa, if you will, is his first name. He'll be starting alongside DeMarcus Lawrence on the outside of the defensive line with the first-year player, Mazi Smith, slated to be their nose tackle. And there are some other young players that Dallas has invested in behind them. They have Sam Williams, their second-round pick from just last year. Neville Gallimore, fourth-year player that they drafted in the 3rd round. They have a rookie here, Viliami Fihoko, drafted in the 4th round, and then another 3rd-year player, Chauncey Golston. So Dallas has certainly been making a conscious effort to try to upgrade this defensive line, as we can see with their draft history. And certainly figures to be not necessarily, I would say it's going to be a pretty solid unit for them, honestly, in the NFL. You could say this is a fringe top 10 unit. We discussed the Cincinnati Bengals and what they have going. I know this is different. Dallas running really just 3 down linemen here, but I think with the talent they have behind them especially, if this unit can be a top 10 one in the National Football League, certainly sets the tone for success for Dallas, because all these players really need to do is just kind of stave off the offensive linemen of the opposition and create gaps for none other than Micah Parsons to just make a bull rush at the quarterback or at the running back. Whoever has the football, really, Micah Parsons is going to be there. We know that much. And they just have him listed as a Leo here. So he's going to be somebody certainly that is going to be all around the football, whether he's deflecting balls at the line of scrimmage, whether he's going in for the sack, whether he's tackling running backs in the backfield, or even if he's stripping the quarterback of the football and recovering it himself. He is somebody who is going to be a difference maker for this Dallas Cowboys defense, as going to be a player that is absolutely going to be in the mix for Defensive Player of the Year. And honestly, if the MVP hasn't become such a quarterback-based award, he very well could be in the mix for that MVP award as well, though with the climate of the MVP award in 2023, I do find that very unlikely, despite the fact that he is certainly deserving of it so far. Looking at the rest of the linebacker spots here, we have Leighton Vander Esch certainly slated to start at the Mike linebacker. And then we do have some competition going on for the backup Mike position between Devin Harper and Jabril Cox. Definitely was a big fan of Jabril Cox coming out of LSU in 2021. I thought Dallas got a steal in the 4th round with him, although he hasn't really gotten a chance to shine yet. So, for any Cowboys fans out there that aren't sure about Jabril Cox, I would certainly be excited to see what he could bring to their football team if he is forced into action. Then looking at the will linebacker position, certainly 2 players with a lot of athleticism here. Second-year player Damone Clark, as well as the rookie DeMarvion Overshown. Both of these guys certainly turned heads in the preseason opener against the Jacksonville Jaguars. So Dallas absolutely loaded at the linebacker spot here. They also have Dante Fowler just casually sitting down here on the depth chart in the holster. So solid defensive line, certainly elite linebacker play, I would say. And then looking at the secondary, of course, Trayvon Diggs, their number 1 corner. Stephon Gilmore slated to start as their number 2, with Malik Hooker and Donovan Wilson holding down the safety position. Then Jordan Lewis currently on the PUP list right now, though hopefully he figures to be back into action for Dallas this season. But you do have Deron Bland and Kelvin Joseph waiting behind him there, 2 young players as well. So this is a young, hungry unit for Dallas, really from head to toe on defense. And honestly, as surprising as this is for the Dallas Cowboys, I would say the biggest weakness on this team right now is this offensive line. If they can get this offensive line figured out, I think the rest will really fall into place for them. And that all starts with paying Zack Martin, which, if I were Jerry Jones, I feel like that's an absolute slam dunk. I understand the hesitancy in the past to pay somebody like Ezekiel Elliott, given the nature of the running back position, how they sort of seem to just hit a wall once they reach 1,000 carries or the age of 30 or whatever that magic number you want to say it is. At some point, the elite running backs just seem to hit a wall. Or even when it came to giving somebody like Amari Cooper $20 million a season, that one certainly seemed to come back to bite the Cowboys, though they were able to move on from him with relative ease and bring in, alongside him, CeeDee Lamb to develop into his eventual successor. And I would say right now CeeDee Lamb is a better option for the Cowboys than Amari Cooper ever was. No disrespect to Amari Cooper. Tremendous player for originally the Oakland Raiders and more recently the Cowboys and now with the Cleveland Browns, of course. So no disrespect to Amari Cooper, but I feel like paying Zack Martin is really the easiest call out of all of those. An all-pro offensive lineman, has been dominating for pretty close to a decade. He really, once he was drafted in 2014, and this is a player Dallas drafted instead of Johnny Manziel, which one of Jerry's best moves, honestly, in his history in the front office. I know he's not the person doing the scouting. He's getting a lot of recommendations from his staff, but definitely it would have been very easy for him to just say, yeah, you know what? I know you guys want me to take Zack Martin, but we'll end up taking Johnny Manziel instead. He does have the final say, obviously, in the front office, so you would think when he selected Zack Martin, and he was somebody who stepped in and immediately made Dallas one of the best offensive lines in the NFL, and they really haven't looked back since, it would be a slam dunk move to pay him. And I think if you're able to get him in there, get him engaged this season, it definitely helps. make this offensive line one of the better units in the NFL. I think with Zack Martin in the lineup with Tyron Smith, that alone should make this unit a top 10 unit in the NFL, but without Zack Martin, this really starts to crumble on itself and really becomes a huge question mark for the Dallas Cowboys. So for their sake, I even say this as a Philadelphia Eagles fan, I hope Zack Martin does get paid. He certainly deserves it, and certainly for any Cowboys fans, I know they would hope the same because offensive line is probably their biggest area of opportunity right now. So looking ahead to how this roster is going to compete when it comes to the actual schedule this year. So Dallas starts off against both the New York teams back to back, the Giants followed by the Jets, and I think them defeating the Giants should be a slam dunk. I know this is a divisional game, so certainly anything is on the table, but in my eyes, the Dallas Cowboys are the far superior team to the New York Giants, just supremely talented, more so than the New York Giants. I have a tough time finding a position I could really say decisively the New York Giants are better than the Dallas Cowboys at. Granted, I haven't gone through and examined the New York Giants roster with a fine-tooth comb like we just did with the Dallas Cowboys. You could make the case that, sure, Saquon Barkley might be a better player than Tony Pollard, and I certainly wouldn't dispute that, but I would be hard-pressed at this point in time to find a position where I would say, yes, the New York Giants are clearly superior to the Dallas Cowboys. So give the nod to Dallas here on the road in Week 1 at MetLife Stadium. And then coming back on Week 2 against the new-look New York Jets, I think Dallas should be able to win this game as well. This will definitely be a very hard-fought game. Having Zack Martin in the lineup could very well be the deciding factor in this matchup. Having him go up against somebody like Quinnen Williams would certainly be advantageous for the Cowboys, but if Zack Martin is back in the roster by Week 2, I'll give this one to Dallas. If he's not, maybe I would reconsider. But as of right now, I'll give this one to the Dallas Cowboys in their home opener. Looking at Week 3 against the Arizona Cardinals, this one's a slam dunk. Dallas should win this game, no questions asked. Week 4 against the New England Patriots. Never could count out the Patriots. They are sneaky talented on the offensive side and defensive side of the trenches, so won't count that out. Again, if Zack Martin is in the lineup, this game could certainly be more interesting, but as of right now, I will give the nod to the Dallas Cowboys. Then looking at Week 5 against the San Francisco 49ers, I know this might be a little bit controversial. This is a Sunday night game, but I'm going to give this to the Dallas Cowboys on the road. I do believe that San Francisco does have some question marks, and that is not just limited to the quarterback position. I know that's been the narrative with the 49ers all off season. San Francisco has this absolutely loaded roster from head to toe, besides perhaps the most important position at quarterback. Though I do have a couple questions for San Fran on the offensive line as well. And if that is the case, I think Dallas's defense, particularly Micah Parsons, will eat this offensive line alive. They do have Trent Williams now in his 14th year, but man, if you're relying on a 14th year offensive lineman to really hold that unit together, there aren't really any players. Again, we haven't gone through San Francisco's roster with a fine-tooth comb yet either, but as of right now, I like the matchup of Dallas's defense against their offense. And Dallas's offense against San Fran's defense, that could prove to be a little tricky for Dallas, but again, having Zack Martin in the lineup would certainly help their case, so that just shows, too, that having Zack Martin could certainly flip the script on a couple very important games here. So as of right now, I have Dallas finishing 13-4, but give those two games to the Jets and 49ers respectively, it would drop them down to 11-6. They would still make the playoffs as a wild card, but they would potentially fall to the 6th seed instead of the Seattle Seahawks. It would propel them to the 5th seed. And that could be a big difference, because then Dallas would have to go in and play a Detroit team, which I think is far superior to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers or whoever ends up winning this NFC South division. So looking ahead here at the remainder of Dallas' schedule, I do have them losing to the Los Angeles Chargers on the road, staying in California here back-to-back weeks. LA will be coming off of their bye week, so that definitely goes against the Dallas Cowboys as well. But then after this matchup on a Monday night, Dallas does get an extra week of rest before coming home against another California team, the Los Angeles Rams. But Dallas is the better team than LA at this point. The Rams, we'll see when we get to the LA video, but LA really is in. They've kind of just been stuck in neutral since winning that Super Bowl and kind of just been gradually getting worse. Their star players have been getting older, and they really haven't been bringing in any talent to help reinvent this team. So, as much of an offensive genius as Sean McVay may be, will not be enough against this Dallas Cowboys team. And then immediately after that, they go into the link against the Philadelphia Eagles. And I actually think Dallas can very much win this game. The Eagles are in the midst of a very difficult stretch around this point in time. So Dallas, with just one game after their bye week against the lowly Rams, I think they could come in and certainly win this game, although it will be a highly contentious battle as all Eagles-Cowboys games are. Then in Week 10, they get the New York Giants again, this time at home. Again, I don't really think this one's up for debate too much. I'll give this one to Dallas. Same thing with Week 11, Dallas going up against a rookie quarterback in Bryce Young, and certainly a developing Carolina Panthers roster. Dallas should take this one with relative ease. Then they come back on the short week on Thanksgiving against the Washington Commanders. This one could be a sneaky trap game for the Cowboys, but I do think they are the better team when all's said and done, and should win this game with as much ease as you could have for a divisional game, much like the New York Giants. Moving along, they do get the tripping over my own words there. The Seattle Seahawks, the double S, on another Thursday game, this time at night, again at home. And coming down the stretch, I think Seattle could very much win this game. This again will be a very contentious battle. Two teams that certainly expect to be playing in January. Wouldn't be surprised if Dallas won this one, but I do love what Seattle's done at the skill positions. They have the 1-2-3 punch now with DK Metcalf, Tyler Lockett, and Jackson Smith-Njigba at the wide receiver spot. And they do have the 1-2 punch in the backfield of Kenneth Walker and Zach Charbonnet, figuring that those two players are healthy, of course. But as of right now, I give this one to Seattle, and this is a tough stretch again for Dallas here, where really these next 5 games coming out of Thanksgiving, they get the Seattle Seahawks and the Philadelphia Eagles at home before 2 road games against the AFC East with the Buffalo Bills and Miami Dolphins, and then the Detroit Lions, another team that figures to be in the playoffs this time at home. So over these 5 games, I have Dallas going 2-3. I mean, you could really slice this however you want. Like this Eagles game, you could have them winning this, but I think if that were the case, the Eagles probably win up here. Eagles and Cowboys like to split their matchups typically, so you could put this order in whatever you want. If you want to give it to the 2 home teams, I really wouldn't hold it against you, but as of right now, I do have this as a Cowboys victory in Week 9 and then an Eagles victory in Week 14. Cowboys are in more of a difficult stretch here, whereas the Eagles, I think, are in more of a difficult stretch up here, but certainly could be reversible. Coming off of 2 tough games against the Eagles and Seahawks, though, going into Buffalo in the middle of December, that's certainly a tough matchup for the Cowboys. I think it will be just a little bit too much for Dak Prescott and company. But then moving along to going down to sunny South Florida on Christmas Eve, I think they should be able to handle the Miami Dolphins. Definitely intrigued by that matchup of Miami's receivers against Dallas' secondary. Trayvon Diggs, I think, should be able to hang with either Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle, though I do have concerns regarding Stephon Gilmore at age 33 going up against either of those players, 2 of the fastest players in all of the National Football League, so certainly worth keeping an eye on that. If I were Dallas strategizing going into that week, I would certainly plan on giving the corners some safety help or linebacker help, however you want to slice it, to make Stephon Gilmore's life in particular a little bit easier. But I do think Dallas ends up coming out of this game with a victory despite that fact. I like the matchup of Dallas's defense against the Miami Dolphins offense otherwise, and I think Dak Prescott's going to do just enough to make sure Dallas is leading this game, have more points on the board when the clock hits 0 in the 4th quarter. Week 17, they come back home for the first time since December 10th, now on December 30th, so first time in 20 days back at Jerry World, and this could be a potential playoff preview between them and the Detroit Lions. And I do like Dallas in this matchup at home, though this could be another very hard-fought matchup. Then they end their season at FedEx Field against the Washington Commanders. And the playoff picture should be relatively set by this point. If that's the case, maybe Washington wins this game like they did last year, but as of right now, I'll give Dallas this game if they need it. If Dallas doesn't need it, maybe it goes to Washington. Excuse me. So when all's said and done here, I have Dallas finishing with a 13-4 record. Do believe Philadelphia ends up winning this division yet again, but certainly believe Dallas is probably the third best team in the NFC, perhaps even the second best team. Certainly a three-team race, I would say, between the Eagles, Cowboys, and 49ers for this NFC. Could certainly have some other teams emerge, like the Seattle Seahawks or Detroit Lions. Do think Minnesota takes a bit of a step back from their success last year, but all in all, I think it'll be a very successful season for Dallas, and we could certainly tinker around with some of these games. Maybe they lose to San Fran and the Jets, but maybe they end up winning against Seattle. Maybe they end up losing one of these games to the Dolphins or the Lions. But even then, Dallas still very much figures to be in the playoff mix. I think they'll have a very good shot at being the 5th seed this year. That's probably their most likely spot as of right now. And I really don't see them falling below the 6th seed as a worst case scenario. And their best case scenario would be ending up as perhaps even the 1 seed, edging out Philadelphia for this NFC East win. And I think if they win the NFC East, they very well could be the number 1 seed in the entire conference. Certainly if they defeat San Francisco in Week 5. That being said, we'll look at the playoff predictions for the Dallas Cowboys, which I think this will be a pretty good run for them, honestly. Looking at the wild card round, I have them slated to go up. Of course, it just resets everything. So, looking at the wild card round, I do have them projected to go into Tampa Bay yet again. And like last season, I think they should be able to come out of that matchup victorious, especially without Tom Brady in the picture. Then going into the divisional round, they get their matchup again with the San Francisco 49ers, although I do believe this time Dallas could certainly come out on top. Maybe San Fran's able to use whatever they got in that Week 5 matchup as something to study going into this game, but the same could be said for the Cowboys. And I do like the matchup of Dallas going up against that 49ers offensive line. Sure, Brock Purdy could be healthy by then, but despite Brock Purdy's success last season, for me, he's certainly a player who still needs to prove himself at the NFL level, at least that he can compete more consistently at the NFL level and produce more consistently. So as of right now, I do give this nod to the Dallas Cowboys. Then going into the NFC Championship game, which would be their first appearance since 1995, they would be going up against the Philadelphia Eagles for the 3rd time this season. And I do give the nod to the Eagles here. It'd be a very tough environment for them coming in on the road against the Eagles, although if they do end up winning this game, it would be quite the environment. The Link would be absolutely stunned, and I would certainly fear for any Cowboys players or fans leaving that stadium, unfortunately. But I think this could be a great season for the Cowboys, certainly a step forward from last season. They lose in the wild card round in 2021, lose in the divisional round last year. They advance to the conference championship again this year. Well, don't want to say again. Take another step forward, I guess I should say again this season. Certainly bodes well for them. You always want to be looking to advance further in the playoffs. Never want to fall back in losing the same round you did the year before, and certainly don't want to go out earlier than you did the year before. So, while Dallas doesn't get back to the Super Bowl, I would call this season a success for them if things were to shake out as such. Now quickly, before the video ends, we'll take a look at Dallas' salary cap situation. And it's certainly an interesting one, as it is with any team in the playoff picture. As of right now, Dak Prescott's contract is structured very interesting, with only a $26 million cap hit next year, but projected to balloon to just under $60 million next year. I absolutely expect this deal to get restructured at some point beyond 2024, with some of this cap hit being spread out over the next few seasons here. And even Cooper Rush signed for the next 2 seasons as well, so they really don't have to worry about finding a backup plan for him. We'll look at the running back spot here. Tony Pollard playing on the tag this year, of course. Definitely would be intrigued to see how this shakes out beyond the season. If Deuce Vaughn can end up having a bit of a breakout campaign as a rookie, he could certainly look to steal this job from Tony Pollard, much like Tony Pollard stole this job from Ezekiel Elliott. The franchise tag does increase each year you use it with a player, so if they were to franchise tag Tony Pollard again, it would be greater than this $10 million cap hit for the following season. So definitely intrigued to see what Dallas does with Tony Pollard, especially if he has another great season. Would they be willing to give him the bag like they did with Ezekiel Elliott? Would they hit him with the franchise tag again? Would Tony Pollard like being hit with the franchise tag again? A lot of question marks there. So looking now at their wide receiver spot, they have a ton of money tied up into Michael Gallup, surprisingly, is the most heavily invested player here. Locked up through 2026, but CeeDee Lamb on the last year of his rookie deal this year before his club option for 2024. Certainly expects CeeDee Lamb to get a massive raise in 2025. I think $20 million is really the start of the conversation for a CeeDee Lamb extension. Honestly, if I were him, I would probably even ask for more than that. Teams certainly, unlike the running back position, teams are certainly willing to open up the wallet for the wide receiver spot. Then Brandon Cooks signed for just the next 2 seasons. Figure he is probably just a Cowboy for the next 2 seasons. Can be a nice number 2 option besides CeeDee Lamb, whereas by the time we get to 2025, they'll probably look elsewhere for a receiving option. Going down to tight end, like we said earlier, 2 young players here signed at a very reasonable cap hit for the next 3 seasons, 4 seasons in the case of Luke Schoonmaker. So definitely impressed with what Dallas has done there. And they're going to have to spend money at other positions, so understandably so, they don't want a lot of money tied up at the tight end spot. Now looking at the offensive line, and this is certainly where things get interesting. So both of their tackles are only signed for this season. Tyron Smith certainly more intriguing there, as he will be entering year 14 in 2024, and he's not under contract, so it's entirely possible Tyron Smith decides to call it a career after this year, depending how the season ends. But that's another player they'll potentially need to open up the checkbook for if they want to keep him beyond 2023. And Terrence Steele as well in a contract year, so never good to have question marks at the tackle positions. Then looking at the guard spot, Zack Martin, of course, looking for a fresh contract, only signed for the next 2 seasons. He certainly wants to be extended beyond 2024 at a higher salary cap figure. So that's something Dallas is going to have to work out. But really looking at this offensive line, Dallas doesn't have a lot invested here at all, especially beyond 2023. So I really don't see what the holdup is on a Zack Martin extension. Jerry Jones really just needs to get this done, and that's just me looking in from the outside, but I don't understand what the holdup is here. Looking at some of the other players they have, Tyler Smith signed for the next 3 seasons plus a potential option for 2026, of course, and then their starting center signed for just this season as well, so definitely concerning stuff for the Dallas Cowboys on the offensive line. Definitely questioning where their head's at when it comes to the game plan going forward. If I had to make a prediction as of right now off the cuff, I would say in the 2024 draft, they are probably looking for offensive line early and potentially often. Possibly needing a tackle. They could have Tyler Smith slide over to replace Tyron Smith, but then you'll need another guard. They potentially need another right tackle and potentially another center as well. So very troubling concerns there for the Dallas Cowboys on the offensive line. Looking at the defense now, DeMarcus Lawrence just signed for the next 2 seasons. He'll be in his 11th season in 2024, so be interested to see if they extend him beyond that point. And Dorrance Armstrong just signed for this season. Dante Fowler just signed for this season. Double O here signed for the next 2 seasons, although he will be due for a raise in 2025, certainly, if Dallas looks to bring him back. Mozzie Smith signed for the next 4 years, plus a potential 5th-year option, so no concerns there. So definitely with Dallas on the defensive line, they're fine right now, but beyond 2023 certainly could start to have some question marks, much like their offensive line. So Dallas, not bad in the trenches right now, but in the 2024 draft, I have a feeling that's where they're going to look in terms of their future draft capital. So looking at the linebacker spot, things are relatively stable here. Nobody in a contract year this season, which is certainly a relief for a unit as strong as this one, although Leighton Vander Esch and Jabril Cox will be free agents by the time we get to 2025. And then, of course, the big elephant in the room, Micah Parsons. This 2025 option will certainly be picked up, barring any major injury. And I imagine starting in 2026, he's going to get the bag rightfully deserved. Looking now at the secondary, Only players in a contract year here are Stephon Gilmore, Jaron Curse, and Jordan Lewis. Certainly will need to be replaced in terms of production, but nothing overly concerning there. Trayvon Diggs already got the bag, rightfully deserved yet again, locked up with the team through 2027, and Malik Hooker signed with the team through 2026, so I'd like to see that. Kelvin Joseph signed for the next 2 seasons, Donovan Wilson for the next 3, so not too many question marks with Dallas at the secondary, really not any at linebacker. The skill positions, they're relatively set. I think CeeDee Lamb's going to get his contract extension. Tight end, they don't have to worry about. Maybe a question mark at running back here, but if I'm looking at the 2024 draft and had to make a prediction, they're going trenches. That just seems to be how things are trending right now. So that's all I really got on the Dallas Cowboys. Certainly a large fan base, seemed to be very mobile, definitely have a lot of fans in a lot of different places. Certainly have the largest fan base, I would say, nationwide. So love to hear from any Cowboys fans out there. How do you think this season's going to go? Think they end up winning the NFC East? How far do you think they go in the playoffs? Because I certainly believe they are making the playoffs. Can they finally defeat the San Francisco 49ers? And what about Dak Prescott? How do you think he's going to do this year? I think he'll probably have a bounce-back season, and how does this question mark with Zack Martin get resolved? Because honestly, I think a lot of their 2023 success will hinge on whether he gets paid or not. So that's all I've got on the Cowboys. Love to hear from anybody down below with your thoughts, and look forward to talking about the Broncos in the